All right, our next panel is going to discuss our birth, life, and afterlife of food, growing community food systems session. Now, they're going to discuss key projects that maintain our area's food system. Remember to think of questions and enter them into the Menti system after our last speaker for our Q&A session. So, first, we'll hear from Jim Strickland. Jim is a multi-generation Florida rancher who owns Strickland Ranch, is managing partner of Big Red Cattle Company and Blackbeard's Ranch, and serves as vice chair of Florida Conservation Group and Florida Climate Smart Agricultural Work Group co-chairman. Then we'll hear from Tiffany Bailey about local food production. Tiffany is a fifth-generation farmer in Sarasota and Manatee counties. She is the CEO and owner of Bayside Sod Incorporated and Honeyside Farms. These operations are responsible for more than 900 acres of turf grass, all natural cattle, and organic fruits and vegetables. Then we're going to hear from Sandra, who will discuss local community gardens. She has served as the Laurel Civic Association president since 1988. The organization's reach has touched nearly every aspect of the community, from bringing water, drainage, and sidewalks to the historical African American community to assisting struggling families with food and other essentials. After, we will end the panel discussion with Tracie Troxler. She is the executive director of Sunshine Community Compost, a nonprofit that educates and activates community members to compost. She believes that composting is an accessible and transformative tool for restoring balance and reciprocity within our planet, our communities, and ourselves. So let's go ahead and welcome our panel up here.
Are we ready?
I think you're ready to go.
Wonderful. I'm going to try not to be the gentleman with before that had trouble with his microphone. But boy, was he interesting. You know, whenever you live in the woods, and you just went through Hurricane Ian, and we've got 9 different ranches across about 3 counties through here. We are really looking at solar. We have a lot of solar wells that we have done cost shares on, but that panel on solar really grasped our attention. So this is a really great sale job that you see of our state of Florida. And, you know, a lot of us that grew up here, my grandmother actually lived just over my right shoulder, right on Sarasota Bay, so I spent a lot of time right here. And my uncle was manager at Eastern Airlines here at the airport. So that was the mother side of my family that spent a lot of time in Sarasota. My father's side, of course, was in cattle and politics. But growing up at nearly every restaurant, you saw this sale job of some sort of Florida. But we really didn't need to sell our great state. I think we live in the sexiest, most dynamic state in the nation. I truly do. We have the coastlines, we have the water, we have the surfing, we have Mickey Mouse, we have the dynamics of Miami, of Tampa, we have the culture, multicultures, because I just love the different cultures that have migrated into Florida. I am 1/8 Seminole, so you know I recognize our native population, certainly all of them that were here before us, and what they led, the kind of life they led. And so we're talking about sustainability today. Being in ranching, I have been here in the Strickland family since about 1840, 1850, that we have been here in the cattle industry. We've not amassed any great amount of money and land and jets and all of those things, that it's been somewhat of a struggle as we've gone along. But sustainability for ranching, and I can speak to ranching, but I really can't speak to farming like Tiffany can or others, citrus. We have to be profitable. And profitability means being very diverse in what we do. So we grew up with all of these things, and I wish I knew how to do the next slide, but whoever does, if they could hit the next slide. So whenever you are a hero, Tiffany. This is the next slide. So we do everything we possibly can to make money. That means to us sustainability, it means profitability. So we do everything. Looking at that hamburger, we're much more than that hamburger. So we do sable palms that we sell for DOT for residential areas. We sell heart of palm cabbage to some of the upscale restaurants here. We sell exotic pork that we've imported and raised here in Florida, you know, from Hungary and Poland and Austria. We're also in the beef business. We're, besides the cattle, we also are part owner of Florida Cattle Ranchers Beef, which we were in 438 public stores. We as ranchers found out real quickly, we're great ranchers, we're great family people, but we didn't know a thing about the beef business. Not a thing. So we're still working at it. We process about 100 head of cattle a year. We are the largest in the state of Florida, and all of them are from ranches. My 11 partners are all big ranches. I'm the smallest one. So as we keep looking at ways to diversify, we're hay, and we're seed, and we're sod, we're timber, and we're sable palms. We need more if we're going to stay in business. We are now looking at a lot of conservation easements where basically you buy our development rights. Somebody does. Most of the time it's the government, but it could be a private entity. But that will only get you so far because I've just sold, the only thing I've sold was my development rights, the ability to build a house on a piece of dirt that I own. That's it. In perpetuity, which means my heirs will never, ever be able to build a house on that piece of dirt. You give me about approximately 50% of the dollar, and that's not the appraisal technique they use, but basically, if my land's worth $6,000, you're going to give me about $3 forever. It's also my responsibility to maintain that land forever. It's in that legal instrument. Willing seller, willing buyer, it's certainly fair. I want us to look more like this hamburger. Instead of you're just buying our development rights, I want to be able to quantify, I want to be able to quantify what we do for society, for the 21 million people that live here and all the tourists that come and go throughout here and all of the water you use. I want to be able to quantify what else we do. Besides the beef and the vegetables and the sable palms and the timber, I want to know about carbon sequestration. I want to know exactly what every piece of land, every acre that we own, how much carbon that sequesters. I want to know about ephemeral wetlands. I want to know about sheet flow and how that's going to affect water quality for those of us that live downstream. I also live in Venice part-time, so I understand those things. I want to know what a wildlife corridor is worth per acre depending on where you are in the state of Florida, to where you can click on a map, do a polygon around it, see what kind of soil type we have, see what kind of wetlands we have, and I want everybody to be able to put a figure on that. But that's going to take a whole different mindset. I'm a cowboy. I have a high school education, but I do realize that we have to continue to diversify, we have to continue to think outside the box, and we have to continue to strive to show everybody that's not in agriculture what we do for society passively using that wild landscape that you benefit from. But we also then need to convince you, because you're the taxpayers. You're the one that's going to be able to have to, let your politicians vote for a tax credit or a subsidy or more cost shares. So, you can look at the lettuce and you can think about ephemeral wetlands. You can look at the onions and you can think about wildlife corridor habitat. You can look at the tomato and you can think about ephemeral wetlands that recharge some aquiferian systems. Carbon sequestration, oxygen, all of those things, but we need funding for that. We just missed a $100 million grant that Solutions from the Land that I'm co-chair of, and it is probably the largest solutions looking at agricultural lands for global warming, climate change in the state of Florida. We partner with the University of Florida. On our board is the governor's chief science officer, is the head of DEP, the assistant secretary of DEP. We have Director of Ag Water Policy for FDACS. We have a stellar blue ribbon committee looking at these things. We really need the funding, but the legislature in Tallahassee is going to have to help. A lot of our budget flows through University of Florida and IFAS, which is wonderful. Look around the room, and they are a walking part of the answers to the issues that we face in Florida, a very important part. So we are going to start using artificial intelligence. We've already started doing that across Florida with grad students with about a $5 million budget, but we're looking at about $5 to $10 million a year. We need to be able to collect the data, quantify the data, put a dollar amount on that data, and then be able to turn around and show you what we do for society that we don't get paid for. So to stay sustainable, we have to realize the assets of which you have. You have some great parks. We live right next to Myakka State Park. We border them for 2 or 3 miles at one ranch. But there's so many other things that we need to work on. So for sustainability, for us, is a lot of education to the rest of the population, because we're only about 0.5% of the population, 0.5% part of the population. We don't have a lot of votes. We don't have a lot of political juice. You do. The activism that I see within the diverse groups in this room today is phenomenal. I'm a cowboy. We got a ranching group. There's very few of us, and most of us are so daggum independent that we don't like to ask for help, and we don't like to tell you what we're doing for you. And I think we need to change that mindset. The first speaker of the day, I just bought her book, Wisdom from the Wild. Oh my God, that's great. I mean, that's just phenomenal. And we live that every day. So I am Jim Strickland. I live in Sarasota, Manatee County. Blackbeard's Ranch is where I call home whenever I'm in the woods, and we won the Best Environmental Ranch of the Year for the United States of America in 2019. Thanks to a lot of advisors, some of which are in this room. I've worked with Christine Quigley, and a lot with Molly back there, with Julie Morris, and I'm grateful for all the help that you have given us. So thank you for honoring me to let me speak today.
All right, I'm going to do it a little differently. I'm going to stand, get some wiggles out. Good morning, my name is Tiffany Bailey. I'm a farmer, I'm an entrepreneur, and I want to do it a little different. I want to take you guys on a little journey with me, where over the next 10 minutes, I'll show you a few things about our local food systems, and I'll show you to what I'm calling to be a thoughtful solution that our local food systems have to climate change. Can you get? Okay, thank you. So before we get started, I want to lay out some terminology that I'll use over the next 10 minutes. The first one is food miles, and some of you may know these terms, but if you don't, that's okay. You're going to learn them here in the next 30 seconds. So food miles is the distance that food travels from grower to consumer. The second term is CSA, which is short for community-supported agriculture. Community-supported agriculture is a partnership between a consumer and local farms. Customers buy shares of a farm harvest in advance, which helps the farmer with upfront cost. And in exchange, the consumer receives weekly harvests from the farm. On our farm, we actually have a CSA, but we also call it a veggie box subscription. Only about 12% of the United States knows and recognizes what a CSA is. So on our farm, we also call it a veggie box subscription, and that's a little more indicative of what a CSA actually may be. Okay, on our farm, we give a lot of farm tours. And for the past 10 years, I've been giving a lot of farm tours, often to the restaurants that we work with. They'll come in and they'll bring their staff, or some people from the local community will come, and they come to our farm and they learn about what we're doing. And for the past 10 years, what I used to do is I would start out these farm tours the exact same way. What we would do is we would gather around, and I would start out by talking about some research about food miles, and that on average, food that is purchased from a chain grocery store or a chain restaurant supply company has traveled about 1,500 miles. So a lot of the food that we're eating has over 1,500 miles on it. And I would talk about the transportation during that process and how there's a lot of emissions that come from that transportation. And by reducing those food miles when we eat locally, we can reduce some of those emissions from transportation. And when I would talk about that, you could really see something click in people's heads, and it's very easy to realize that by shortening that distance, we can effectively reduce some of those emissions that are affecting our environment. But what we're learning recently is that there's a little bit more to the story. What we've learned recently is that while this transportation piece is important, transportation, depending on what research you look at, really only makes up about 8 to 15% of food-related emissions. And so while that's important and we need to pay attention to our food miles, there's another solution that our local food systems offer to climate change that I think needs a little bit more attention. And that solution is reducing food waste. Food waste is a really big issue in the world and in our nation. We throw away about 30 to 40% of the food that we produce. 30 to 40% of the food that we produce never ends up in our tummies and it ends up wasted. And when we can reduce this food waste, that is a very known solution to climate change. That's a very known solution to climate change. Right here you see a slide, and it's from a group that's gotten a lot of attention. It's called Project Drawdown. And when it comes to effective solutions to climate change, reducing food waste is their top solution. This is an article from the UN that talks about food waste, and the UN lists reducing food waste as a top 5 solution to climate change. So depending on where you look, you're going to see a little bit different level of importance, but we can all very easily agree that it's very important to reduce our food waste. Okay, so how do our local food systems have a part here? What I really wish I could show you right now is a beautiful graph by some respectable research that says if we consume food with 100 or less food miles, we'll reduce our food waste by 57% or 61% or some really good substantial number. But I can't show you that because that research doesn't exist yet. So if we can't solve that entire puzzle, I want to at least look at some pieces of the puzzle. Okay? So the next few slides, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some things that we know about our local food system. A little warning, they may seem a little bit random, but I promise I will bring them together, and you will see why I believe they can help us effectively reduce food waste. This is a slide of our food supply cycle. And this slide actually does a really good job of some cute little pictures and some neat little arrows, and it makes it look a little simple, but the reality is that our food supply cycle is extremely complex. A lot of us saw that during COVID when there was supply chain disruptions, and our food supply cycle is extremely complex. And at every sort of transition point, we have a risk of food being wasted. And this point is a little obvious, but you got to think about it. If we can shorten that food supply cycle, we effectively reduce the chances that that food will be wasted. The next piece of the puzzle comes from some really cool research from the Journal of Agriculture Sustainability. And what this research did was it showed correlations in communities where there's readily access to local foods. And what we know is that communities that have access to farmers markets and CSAs are correlated with increase in vegetable consumption, fewer meals eaten out at restaurants, I want you to remember that one, less consumption of processed food, and lower rates of obesity and diabetes. This next piece of the puzzle is a little bit of a psychology piece. This piece comes from research on consumer behavior, and what we know is that when people eat out at restaurants, there's an increased risk in wasted foods. And that's not just from the food that they're eating out at the restaurant or eating away from their home, it's food in general. So when people eat away from the home, there's an increased risk in food waste. Okay, just a quick recap of what we just went over. We learned that if we can shorten the food supply cycle, we can effectively reduce the risk that that food will be wasted. We learned that there's some cool correlations with communities that have access to local food, some health benefits. We learned that people that have access to local food tend to eat out a little bit less at restaurants. And we've just seen that the more people eat out at restaurants, the increased rate of food waste occurs. So I'm going to skip this slide for time purposes, but let's talk about why this matters. I want you to take a good look at this slide And in this slide, that's Ida. She's my farm manager. She's an absolute gem with a great passion for farming and producing local food. And we can see that Ida is here at a farmer's market. We see some beautiful produce that we produced. But if we really take a look, what we can see going on is an absolute connection between Ida and those customers. And this connection is the single biggest solution that I believe our local food systems have to offer in reducing food waste. We have to realize that when our food cycle is incredibly complex and it's grown far away from us, at every point from A to B to C to D, there's an increased risk that our connection to that food will be diluted. If we're purchasing food that's 1,500 miles from us, and then it's shipped to a processor where it's chopped up and packaged, and it's shipped to a distributor, and then it's shipped to a grocery store or maybe to a restaurant that prepares it for us, we're just not going to be that connected to that food. And if we're not that connected to that food, maybe we don't feel as bad throwing it away. The good news is that our local food systems offer us great opportunity to increase this connection. There's amazing opportunities through our local food systems to drive this connection. I want to leave you guys with a couple things that I think you can do. This is a QR code to our farm, and I don't care if you use our farm or another local farm, but it's really important to consider buying some local food. It doesn't have to be all of your diet, that's not the answer, but consider buying local. The second thing you can do is use your voice. Where we're spending our dollars is begging us for feedback. If you're like me, there's probably like 3 surveys sitting in your inbox right now. If you get a survey from a grocery store or a restaurant, use your voice and say that local is important to you. And I'll wrap up by saying that connection is a basic human need. If we can be connected to our local food in our community, it's a great opportunity to be connected. I think that's why a lot of us are here today. And the more connection that we have, the more solutions we can have. Thank you. Hello? There you go.
No. Okay. How are you guys? I really didn't know my subject until I looked at this paper. But I'll do my best because I think this is something that I can do. Talking about community gardens. Community is a very important word to me. I like that word, community. And listening to him, I actually live across the street from the house I was born in. I did go a bit further than that. But we Floridians that are still here, I think we're like these big oaks that are grown old and now they're getting blown over, but we like it here. And like I said, community means a lot to me. As far as the community gardens go, I think we were the 2nd community garden in the county. It's the Laurel Community Garden. It's in Laurel Park, in Laurel. It's not in Nokomis. Some of the things I think are important about the community gardens is anybody can belong in the community garden. And that's the kind of garden that we have. And most of the ones I know, that's how they are. It doesn't matter how old you are, how young you are, if you don't know how to garden. In our garden, we have some people who are very willing to teach you. They will teach you anything about gardening. And that's a good thing. You don't know these people when you start, but you know everybody in about a half an hour. And that's the community about the community gardens. There's education. When my grandkids come down or when somebody comes down, I like to take them through the garden. And about the only thing they can recognize and name is the tomato. What is that? That's asparagus. What's that? That's collard greens. That's lettuce. They don't know this stuff. Now that might sound crazy, but they need to know this stuff. When they go to the grocery store, they don't even know what they're looking at. That's one of the education things. So I like taking them in the garden and taking them through the garden and let them ask me what all those funny looking things are that they probably ate yesterday. But they've never seen it grown. It gives you knowledge. We've got some very good gardeners in our garden. We've got, I think when I started in the garden, I was probably the youngest one in there. And they love it. People love being in the garden. Everybody has their own garden. They do their own garden. And I think we have like 3 people who basically will do anything for anybody in there. The men, for the ladies, if they need something that needs to be done. It's become a small community, and it's great. The sharing. If you're not going to eat it, they will share it with somebody. Me, I never planted anything that I didn't eat because I don't like doing that. If I plant it, it has to be something that I'm going to eat. I can share that with somebody, but I don't just plant things to see them grow. You don't do that. That's wasteful. That's really wasteful. It's good exercise because you have to till your own garden. You have to do all that stuff yourself. There's nobody doing it for you. So you got to cover your garden when you leave. We have a lot of people that leave and they go up north, or they leave and they don't do it in the hard winter or whatever. But community garden is a good name for the communities, and they're all over Sarasota. If we had somebody who lived on Siesta Key and she taught at Compost and she had a garden. So that was on her way home, was her garden. Like I said, community is really important to me, very important to me. Not that you care, but the community center is named after me. There was a reason for that, because the county probably gave me a new name. It was probably, get out of my office, don't come here anymore. But no, I love community. It's really important for all of us, and we need to teach our kids that. My mom would be sitting on her porch, and if kids were walking home past her house, I don't care what they were doing before they got to her house, but they stopped if it wasn't right, because they knew Miss Ruby was going to say something. Hi, Miss Ruby. It's respect. That's community. And you think that doesn't go in the garden, but it does go in the garden, because we're a family in the community garden. If you've got one in your community, go in and talk to the people. They're all really nice people. I mean, it's just a great place to be. And I really like the community garden. And our garden we've had since, early 90s, I think. We were lucky at Laurel Park. And I have to say this one name, and it's Sandra Washington. She's basically responsible for community gardens in the county. She's responsible for a lot of other good stuff, too. We had the land, because you had to have a fence, you had to have water, and you had to have the land to have a community garden. Back then, we had the land, and we had the water. All we needed was the fence. So that's how we got our community garden started. We were lucky. Most people don't have that already. Our garden is going wonderful. It's beautiful. I didn't know it would be as easy to bring some pictures to show you. But like I said, community is really important to me. And I don't live across the street from where I was born because I couldn't get any farther. I live across the street where I was born because I actually live in a community. It's still a community. And the community garden is a wider community, but that's where I am. I love community. And a lot of Floridians know what community is because everybody in Florida isn't from someplace else. I know people think that, but they're not. They're not from someplace else. A lot of us were born here, and we're still here. We invite everybody into our community. So if you know a community garden that's near you, just either call the county and get the connection or go to the garden and talk to whoever's there, and you'll enjoy it. You really will enjoy it. That's my little bit about community and the community garden.
Okay, I think this is on. All right. Let me go ahead and begin. So my name's Tracie Troxler. I'm with Sunshine Community Compost, and I'm going to talk to you today about composting as a pathway for transforming waste into abundance and collaboration. And abundance and collaboration are not always the first words that come to mind when we're thinking about managed decomposition of organic materials, but I want to bring them into the fold. And at the bottom of this first page, it's just an image of transformation in action, just photos we took outside our office, which is a mirror for the composting process. But I want to get these beauty images bringing into the idea of composting. So Sunshine Community Compost is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we educate and activate people around embracing and practicing composting. So we offer education to anyone who ever asks us to teach a class, preschools, elders, community groups, churches, anyone. And we do outreach at community events. We also host food scrap drop-off stations in the city parks. So if you want to participate in composting and you're not doing it at home, you can bring your scraps to us and we'll give you compost back. We offer a pickup service for businesses that have excess food scraps that they want to keep them out of the landfill. We offer backyard support. We want people who start composting to continue into the full life. We do initiatives during International Compost Awareness Week, and we offer zero waste event services. So these are just some photos of some of our work. So for those of you that don't know what composting is, it's the decomposition of organic materials by microorganisms in the presence of oxygen. And it's basically taking food scraps, mixing it with a woody material, making sure that there's air and there's moisture in there, and that calls in the microorganisms and they transform it into this beautiful nutrient-rich soil food. So we want people to start thinking about that life cycle. So composting is our choice, right? We can take our vegetative food scraps and waste them in the landfill, or we can take them and turn them into a resource that can grow new life, that can bring abundance into our lives and into our communities. It's just a simple choice. And as I'm trying to bring in these different images of composting, this is a spider web in the morning sun, and it is reflective of those interconnected benefits that composting brings into our lives. So, you know, it helps us regenerate our soils. It helps us remember that we are receiving food and we have the opportunity to give right back and stay in that receive and give with the planet. If you compost you put compost on your landscapes, you can hold up to compost can hold up to 5 times its weight in water, which means that when we put compost on our landscapes, we can hold water in place instead of having it wash off into the pavement, washing into the watershed, picking up all the road toxins along the way. It brings into focus waste equity. We can now take responsibility for our excess materials instead of sending them away into somebody else's space and concentrating that burden of waste on the planet or somebody else that isn't us. It brings, for those of us that are separating out our food scraps. Tiffany mentioned a lot about wasted food. Now you know what is being wasted most commonly in your household or wherever. And we can make a change now because the awareness has changed. And then in terms of general waste awareness, once you're separating your food scraps and you're going, oh, I can compost this, you start to look around your space and say, what about the chopsticks? What about the matchsticks? What about the paper cup? What about my dental floss? And this whole shift happens. So it helps us to make changes in our awareness. Also, in terms of reducing emissions, we're sending a lot of stuff down to the landfill in Nokomis. It's a lot of travel emissions. And then worldwide, there's emissions happening right out of the landfill when organics go into the landfill. And that leads into climate change. So the more that we can put this nutrient-rich soil food on our landscapes, the more resilient that our plants and trees become, the more that they can draw down that carbon. And then also it helps strengthen community relationships. Everyone here is talking about community in a different way. And any of the things that we're doing brings that sense of community to light, and then new levels of resiliency emerge, which is something that I think is really sweet. Okay, so wow, this is it's interesting the way the photos are coming out, but what is most important is to remember that composting is a collaboration. It's basically an interspecies collaboration. It's an interbeing collaboration. We're collaborating with the elements, right? We have to bring in that, set the system up so that we have the heat, that we have the right moisture content. We're working with the soil microbes. We have the right amount of air. We are collaborating with the elements. We are collaborating with soil, plant, and animal life, right? All of these beings are part of the soil food web, and they're keeping our compost systems in balance and our ecology in balance. We are in constant collaboration. And then we're collaborating with people. And each one of these factors are key for us to have a positive outcome with composting and with our ecology and all of our relations. So I think collaboration is a big word here. And then this has also come up, but here's a couple of photos of perfectly edible food that we found in the compost bins. It's just really important to remember that the most optimal place for edible food is for people. We want people to be eating food first. If you can't get your edible food to people, get it to animals. If you can't get it to animals, then get it into the compost system. But like what Tiffany mentioned is that it's a whole system. And when we waste food, we're wasting soil, water, fertilizer, transportation, fuel, packaging, human care, and attention. We're at the bottom of the chain once it gets to our table. So remembering that web of relations and trying to prevent that at the source is most optimal. All right, so we'll do a little bit more. Okay. And then I just wanted to speak about some interesting collaborations that we're part of. And this is what happens when people start talking about composting. They start thinking about how they can get involved in that. One of our collaborations is with Cityside Apartments. And they reached us. They were curious. Maybe our residents went to compost. Let's do a pilot project. The next thing we know, we have a rooftop compost station at Cityside Apartments so the residents can bring their food scraps there. What happens from there? Now they want to have some community garden beds, and now they'd like to have some compost so they can grow food and share. So you see the emerging collaborations and abundance. This is Sarasota Memorial Healthcare System. So same thing. Can we increase our sustainability? Can we divert food scraps from the landfill? Let's do a pilot project. We'll do it in one area of the hospital. The next thing you know, we're in 5 areas of the hospital, and we're diverting 5,000 pounds of food scraps a month. And in the process, moving around the hospital, talking to the hospital workers, talking to the food service workers, talking to the vendors in the parking lot. Everybody's asking, what is this, blah, 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 blah. And now we're continuing our collaborations and getting to educate more people. And then another, an emerging collaboration, which I just think these things are really fun, is that we had a person who was part of our food scrap drop-off program in the city parks, and she also is part of a church, and they have an environmental committee, and they're like, hey, can you teach a class about composting? And then the next thing you know, hey, can we do a food scrap drop-off program at our church? And so what happens now is there's an embedded community with all these situations, and they're going there on Sunday for their spiritual uplifting and their, congregation. teachings in that, and they're doing their spiritual composting and doing their food scrap composting at the same time. So it's really quite, it's quite valuable to see these different partnerships emerging. So, and then the last thing, I just want to mention some collaborations that we're looking for. We recently lost access to some land that we were going to develop a little compost demonstration site on and do some compost to food growing. So if there's any partnerships out there, people are interested in working with us around that, it's an open invitation. And also, we're looking for more people to get involved as in leadership roles with our organization. So, and that's pretty much all I have today. So everybody keep up the good work with their composting, and if you're not, let's get going. Thank you.
All right, guys, before we move to lunch, we're going to take some more questions. Please remember that if you have a question for a specific speaker, be sure to add their name. So, first question, what can we do about the new minimum energy change brought to us every month by FPL? All right. Yeah. I'm like a child. I just read what's on the screen, you know. Okay. First question officially. How do we buy food that we know is sustainably raised? Click it.
I mean, I can talk loud. Fine.
Get one over here.
That one?
I'm getting an assist.
All right.
Hey.
I kind of liked talking loud, but it's this thing. I think that we just need to devote a little bit more time. There is so much information out there on how and where our food is produced, and just look a little bit beneath the surface sometimes. One of the struggles that farmers have is we're really great at growing good whole foods, but what we're not great at is marketing. So sometimes there's like this loudness that gets the attention, where if we can just look a little bit deeper, there's a ton of information about the food that we're eating. I would also say it's important to consider sacrificing a little bit of convenience. The more that food is chopped up and prepared and packaged into a meal that's ready to cook in 7 minutes or less, there's complexity that goes along with that. So that's something a little bit to look out for, is that don't just go for that convenience, and convenience and sustainability are not always really go good together.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. All right, how about the next question? This is going to be for either Tiffany or Jim, or both. The insatiable appetite for and cost of land for residential development is preventing young people from starting local farming operations. What kind of solutions do you guys see? Need some mic help.
Now we know there's a problem. This is one of them. This is very indicative of the state we live in. Going back to that sexiest state in the union thing, about approximately 1,000 people every day want to move to our state, and a heck of a lot of them want to visit our state. And looking down at these multi-generational farms, that's one of the things they're looking at themselves is sustainability sometimes means selling dirt. And you have to identify those young people that want to participate. One of the opportunities they have is from some low-interest loans that is available to beginning farmers meeting a certain criteria. Another thing is, and I'm huge on this because I truly believe in mentors, is reach out as a young person, and this is part of my answer, is as a young person, reach out to Tiffany and say, hey, can I help you? I'd love to work for you. Or me, saying I would really love a mentor. That's another thing. One of the things that we do see opportunities into the future is conservation easements. Where those development rights have been sold, that piece of property is going to be owned by that family or whoever they pass it down forever with no ability to develop it. So you've just stopgapped that development. So now, what's the price of that land going to be? And a lot of times you'll see these generational farms, like myself. I have one son. He has no intention of coming back and working on a ranch. I have two goddaughters. Problem is, one of them is 4 months old. The other one's 5. So I'm really working at bringing those young girls into the operation that hopefully they'll be able to persist in if they love it. But you have to love it. And I think Tiffany and I could both say, if you don't love agriculture, you don't get into agriculture, but try to support it.
Yeah, that was great, Jim. And you guys are pointing out a real issue here. Again, there are opportunities. Those low interest FSA loans are available. So don't just stop at, oh, it's too expensive. There's some creative solutions. And along with the cost of land, I think it's important to support those beginning farmers. One of my visions that I have for, like 10 years from now is to be able to use our small farm as a model for other farmers to enter the local food system. There's a ton of challenges that come along with land cost, and I'd like to be able to decrease that learning curve, and maybe, having a part of that model could be, having solutions for access to land, because it's something we definitely need to work on.
All right, next question. Have any of you, panel, is regenerative agriculture viable as a sustainable practice?
Yeah, I think we, if we all were to write down what our definition of regenerative agriculture is, there'd probably be some really different definitions. And I don't like to get into extremes that we all need to snap our fingers and go regenerative. We have a population that is fed on a food system that is today. I think a lot of agriculture is looking at regenerative as a very good solution. Not only is it good for climate change in our environment, it's good for the farmer as well. If a farmer wants to keep farming on their land, they have to look at some of these regenerative solutions, and kind of same way, same day is beginning to not work in some situations. And so while I wish it wasn't forced, reaction, I do think that there's a lot of farmers out there that are looking to regenerative. I think we need to keep looking at regenerative agriculture. There's a lot of research, that's out there that can really help farmers that may not know, but they need to know.
All right, next question, please. I'm not going to get tricked this time. Have any of you researched or attempted to implement no-till farming techniques as a way to reduce carbon emissions and maintain soil health?
I feel like I'm mic hogging here. Yes, on our farm, we absolutely attempt no-till. In Florida, one of the biggest challenges we have is the weather. It just creates massive weed issues, and we're organic, so we can't use chemical sprays on them. Unfortunately, the hand labor is extremely expensive, and labor cost is our number one expense item. But Ida, who you saw the picture of, we just did about a half acre where we sterilized the soil by laying a piece of black plastic over it for time. And we're experimenting with that and seeing if we can get some no-till, because there's certainly some solutions there, and I think it needs to be, keep looked at, and that's absolutely something that we're trying to do more of.
Okay, I think we got time for about one more. Tiffany. Lucky you. I go in Whole Foods and see all the citrus from California. Is there any hope for a resurgence of local citrus?
I think maybe Jim might be a little more familiar with citrus. Go for it.
We're extremely hopeful. That's pretty much the answer. We're extremely hopeful because we have seen in our lifetime citrus greening, canker, aphids, imports, land costs, fertilizer costs, human labor costs. Whenever I grew up, there were many fresh fruit farms in this area. Y'all probably remember them, the Nokomis Groves and the Mixed and Fruit Farms and all of those, Burnett Groves, all of those. They can't compete. You have to be big. How can you get the labor? How can you get people to spray? How can you get people to pick a small farm? And that's why part of the reason, besides all the diseases that went by the wayside, I see so many of these orange groves going into solar panel farms. There's a lot of them. We've actually looked at several options for some land we have in the middle of the state that used to be citrus farms. I'm not a citrus farmer, but we have bought citrus farms. We actually bought Mixon's processing facility by Port Manatee, because they couldn't make it. It was very tough. So I'm very hopeful, but we're still betting on so much of this thing that I spoke about is research and working together and coming up with answers and using University of Florida, using FAMU, using Gulf Coast Atlantic University, using all of those universities for research and data to help those of us which are producers. And I'll say all of us are producers. And so we're very hopeful, very hopeful.
All right. Well, thank you folks so much. Let's give it up for all of our speakers this morning.